Welcome back to Opinion Journal Live. I'm joined now by Steve Moore in Washington. How you doing, Steve?
Hi, Dan.
Steve, before we talk about the fiscal cliff, I want to play a quick clip of President Obama in his Washington statement on his impending negotiations with the Republicans. Let's take a quick listen to this right now.
We can't just cut our way to prosperity. If we're serious about reducing the deficit, we have to combine spending cuts with revenue. And that means asking the wealthiest Americans to pay a little more in taxes. That's how we did it. That's how we did it in the 1990s when Bill Clinton was president. That's how we can reduce the deficit while still making the investments we need to build a strong middle class and a strong economy. That's the only way we can still afford to train our workers or help our kids pay for college or make sure that good jobs in clean energy or high-tech manufacturing don't end up in countries like China.
All right, Steve. The Wall Street Journal also reported this morning that the president now intends to launch a public campaign on behalf of his position on the fiscal cliff. So this kind of is, to my mind, giving a somewhat new meaning to congressional negotiations. What are you picking up on the Republican side in reaction to the president's strategy here on the fiscal cliff?
Well, Dan, I love the president's statement that we can't cut our way to prosperity. And then essentially what he's saying is, well, we're going to tax our way to prosperity. Well, good luck with that. I think the Republicans, I did an interview with Mitch McConnell this weekend for the paper, and I was struck by the fact that he and I think John Boehner are of the same mind on this, that they are not going to capitulate on this idea of raising tax rates. Now, they did say, look, we're flexible on raising taxes by closing loopholes and so on. But if the president is going to insist on raising those rates, Dan, I think you're going to have a battle royale. I think this is going to be dragged out for many months, and I don't think it's going to have a happy ending for either party.
Yeah, well, that's right, Steve. I mean, we do know that the one thing the president wants, very specific, very clearly, is to raise those two top rates on the wealthiest.
Right.
I think the
That's
question
right.
at this point, that someone like Senator McConnell must be wondering is, what are they going to get in return? What else beyond the raising of those tax rates is supposed to occur in these negotiations?
Well, one of the things, remember, when we talk about this issue of the fiscal cliff, Dan, there's two really separate issues here. There's what we're going to do on the tax side, which is what we've been talking about, but then of course, there's the spending side where they have this automatic sequester that's going to go into effect. And one of the things, look, my own opinion is I'm not afraid of the sequester. I think spending cuts might be a good thing to do right now. But one thing Mitch McConnell did say is, look, if we're going to turn off the sequester, which probably is going to happen, we want an ironclad guarantee from this president and the Democrats in Congress that we're going to get that amount of spending cuts, $110 billion, somewhere else. And it's a question of whether the president is going to capitulate on that, because quite frankly, this president doesn't want to cut much of anything.
Well, I mean, that's right, Steve. Just to go back to this statement that he made on Friday, he says we need this money to be able to train our workers, help our kids pay for college, and make sure they have good jobs and clean energy. He calls these investments, but investments are, in fact, spending. So what the president's talking about at the moment are increased levels of spending in some categories, and that doesn't sound like cutting the deficit to me.
Not at all. In fact, that's so funny when President Obama says, well, we can't cut our way to prosperity. We haven't cut anything in 4 years. We've had the biggest expansion in government since World War II. But here is the other interesting part of this. If you look at the president's kind of economic recovery plan, he calls for $100 billion more stimulus. So you're right. He has no intention of cutting spending unless Republicans insist upon it. And so that may be the deal, that they might have some tax increase, but it's going to have to be coupled with a real and a very specific cut in government agencies and entitlement programs.
Steve, let me ask you about an irony that was pointed out in our lead editorial this morning, which is that tax receipts, tax payments have been rising in the last couple of years. And that's been happening under the current so-called Bush tax rates.
Yep, you're exactly right about that. And one of the problems with raising these tax rates, Dan, is I believe that they're not going to get anywhere near they think they're going to get $80 billion a year, which, by the way, still leaves us with a $1 trillion deficit. But I'm here to tell you right now, they're not going to get anywhere near $80 billion of revenues. You're going to have tax avoidance strategies. You're going to have people putting their investments somewhere else. They'll be lucky if they get half that amount, which still leaves a gigantic deficit problem.
Yeah. And what if the president doesn't get the growth rate above 2% by 2014?
Well, then they're not going to have any revenue growth whatsoever. I mean, that's the key point, Dan, and nobody's talking about that. How do we get the growth rate back up to 3 to 4 to 5%? I don't see how you do that if you're raising capital gains and dividend taxes.
All right. Thanks a lot, Steve.